What happens when Hollywood's biggest action star loses his cool on live television? In just 29 seconds, everything fell apart. Subscribe now for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. Last night on The View, what started as a simple conversation about environmental activism turned into one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. Jason Momoa sat across from the panel, his massive frame barely contained by the guest chair, ready to discuss his ocean conservation projects. The energy in the studio was electric, cameras rolling, audience packed in tight, everyone expecting another feel-good celebrity interview about saving the planet. But Behar had other plans, and what unfolded next left everyone in that studio absolutely speechless. The cameras were rolling as Momoa began talking about his work with indigenous communities in Hawaii, his passion evident in every word. He spoke about the sacredness of the land, the importance of protecting ancestral waters, and how corporations were destroying ecosystems for profit. His voice carried weight, genuine concern pouring through as he described children who could no longer swim in waters their grandparents had thrived in. He talked about families losing their homes to rising sea levels, about entire cultures being erased by climate disasters, about the urgency of the crisis we're all facing. The audience was engaged, leaning forward, hanging on his words. This was what they came for, what they wanted to hear. Real talk from someone who was actually out there doing the work. But Behar's expression was shifting, her eyes narrowing, and anyone who knew her could see what was coming. Joy leaned forward, her expression shifting from interested to skeptical. "That's all very touching, Jason," she said, her tone dripping with something that wasn't quite respect. "But let's be honest here. You fly private jets all over the world. You live in massive houses, multiple properties, right? Aren't you being just a little bit hypocritical talking about saving the environment?" The studio fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. The audience collectively held their breath. Momoa's jaw tightened visibly, a muscle twitching in his cheek. His eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice dropped an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "Excuse me?" he said slowly, each word deliberate. "What did you just say to me?" "I'm just saying," Joy continued, waving her hand dismissively, seemingly oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the warning signs. "It's easy to preach about saving the oceans when you're worth millions of dollars, when you have the luxury of choosing where you fly, where you live. What are you actually doing besides talking about it on talk shows? I mean, really, what's the difference between you and any other celebrity jumping on the climate bandwagon?" The insult hung in the air like poison gas. Several audience members gasped audibly. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing the tension building like a storm about to break. The other co-hosts exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting between Momoa and Joy. Alyssa looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Sunny's face showed clear concern, but Joy wasn't backing down. She sat there with that smug expression, waiting for his response, clearly thinking she'd scored a point. Momoa sat up straighter, his massive shoulders tensing, his hands gripping the armrests so tight his knuckles went white. "What am I doing?" he repeated, his voice steady but dangerous, like the calm before a hurricane. "You really want to know what I'm doing? I've invested millions of my own money into conservation, not for tax breaks, not for publicity. Millions. I've worked directly with scientists, with marine biologists, with local communities, with people who actually give a damn about more than their next soundbite. I've been doing this work since before it was cool, before celebrities jumped on it for good press, before it became trendy to pretend you care about the planet." His voice was rising now, passion and anger mixing together. "I've been in the water with researchers tagging sharks. I've spent weeks in remote villages helping install solar panels and water purification systems. I've testified before Congress. I've put my money, my time, my reputation on the line, so don't you dare sit there and ask me what I'm doing." "But you still fly private," Joy shot back. a smug smile playing at her lips, clearly enjoying getting under his skin. You still consume. You still participate in the exact system you're criticizing. You still live in luxury while preaching about sacrifice. It just seems performative to me. All of it. Just another Hollywood act. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Performative. Momoa's face flushed red, anger flashing across his features like lightning. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so hard it looked like he might rip them off. Performative? He said, his voice rising sharply, echoing through the studio. You want to talk about performative? You want to lecture me about what's performative? He leaned forward aggressively, pointing at her. You sit here every single day in your air-conditioned studio, talking about issues you read off a teleprompter, pretending to care about things for exactly as long as they're in the news cycle, and you're going to lecture me about what's performative? You've probably never even been to a beach that wasn't a resort, and you're judging how I fight for the oceans? Joy's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hard glare. I don't appreciate your tone, Jason, she said coldly. And I certainly don't appreciate you making assumptions about my life, or what I care about. And I don't appreciate being ambushed on your show. Momoa fired back immediately, leaning forward now, his massive frame dominating the space. You invited me here to talk about real issues affecting real people, actual crises happening right now, and instead you want to play gotcha games? You want to score cheap political points? You want to tear me down because that's what gets views? That's what this is really about, isn't it? The audience sat frozen, divided between gasping and wanting to applaud. Some people were visibly uncomfortable. Others were leaning forward, phones out, recording every second. This wasn't the friendly banter they were used to seeing on daytime TV. This wasn't scripted or planned. This was raw, unfiltered conflict erupting in real time, and everyone could feel it. Nobody's ambushing you, Joy said, her voice hardening, her face reddening. I'm asking legitimate questions that our viewers want answered, questions that any serious journalist would ask. If you can't handle basic scrutiny, if you can't handle being challenged, maybe you shouldn't be positioning yourself as some kind of environmental warrior. Maybe you should stick to making action movies where you can control the narrative. That last line landed like a slap across the face. That was the match that lit the fuse. That was the moment everything exploded. Momoa stood up abruptly, violently, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh screech that made everyone jump. At his full height, all 6'4" of pure muscle and rage, he towered over the desk, his presence suddenly dominating the entire studio, making everyone else seem small. The lights caught his face, showing every bit of anger, every ounce of frustration. Environmental warrior, he said, his voice booming now, filling every corner of the room. You think this is about positioning myself? You think this is about my image? You think I give a damn about how I look to you or anyone else right now? His voice was shaking with emotion. I've held dying coral in my hands. I've seen beaches covered in plastic that used to be pristine. I've looked Hawaiian elders in the eye and promised I'd fight for them. And you're reducing that to image? To positioning? To some kind of career move? Jason, please sit down. Whoopi interjected urgently, trying to restore order, her hands up in a calming gesture, but her voice was completely drowned out by the tension. No, let him talk, Joy said, standing up now herself, refusing to be intimidated, crossing her arms defiantly across her chest. Let's hear it. Let's hear the big, passionate speech. That's what you're good at, right? Big speeches, big gestures? The provocation was clear and deliberate. Momoa's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his whole body vibrating with barely contained rage. You know what your problem is, Joy? You really want to know? His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You've been sitting behind this desk for so long, living in your bubble. You've forgotten what it's like to actually care about something real. To put yourself on the line for something bigger than your next segment, bigger than your next paycheck, bigger than your comfortable little world. where the biggest crisis is what topic to cover next week. That's completely uncalled for, Joy snapped, her voice sharp as a knife, her face now fully red with anger. You don't know anything about my life or what I care about. Don't I? Momoa challenged, taking a step closer to the desk. Because from where I'm standing, you don't actually care about the environment. You don't care about indigenous rights. You don't care about climate change or dying oceans or any of it. You just care about getting your little zingers in, making yourself look clever for the cameras, scoring points against whoever's sitting in that chair. That's all this is to you. A game. Entertainment. The studio audience erupted. Some people were murmuring in shock, others nodding in agreement, others looking scandalized. The producers in the control room were frantically signaling, making cutting motions, shouting into their headsets, but no one on stage was paying any attention. This had gone completely off the rails, and there was no getting it back on track. How dare you, Joy said, her voice shaking now, whether from anger or something else. I've been an advocate for important causes longer than you've been famous. I was fighting for progressive issues when you were still unknown. Don't you dare come on my show and tell me what I care about. Don't you dare question my commitment. Your show? Momoa laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. Nothing funny about it. There it is. Your show. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Control. Ownership. You can't stand that someone's not playing along with your script, that someone's actually calling you out on your bullshit, instead of smiling and nodding and playing the game. Watch your language, Joy warned, pointing at him. This is daytime television. Or what? Momoa challenged, spreading his arms wide, his voice rising again. You'll kick me off? Go ahead. Please. I'd rather leave than sit here and be disrespected by someone who thinks activism is a 15-second soundbite between commercial breaks, who thinks caring about the planet is something you can turn on and off when the cameras are rolling. Sunny Hostin tried to interject, her voice calm but urgent, her hands raised like a referee, trying to separate boxers. Guys, let's take a breath here. We can have this conversation without it getting personal. We can disagree without. There's no conversation to have, Momoa interrupted sharply, whipping around to face her before turning back to Joy, his eyes blazing. She made up her mind about me before I even walked through that door. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Get the big Hollywood guy on, tear him down, make him look like a fraud, like a hypocrite. Good television, right, Joy? Good ratings, that's all that matters, right? Not truth, not actual dialogue, just drama and conflict and clicks. If you can't handle tough questions, that's on you, Joy retorted, her voice cold as ice. That's not my problem. I ask everyone tough questions. That's my job. Tough questions? Momoa's voice rose to a full shout that made the microphones peak and several people in the audience jump. You haven't asked me one substantive question about the actual work. Not one. You didn't ask about the water filtration systems we're installing in native communities that don't have clean drinking water. You didn't ask about the coral restoration projects that are actually showing results. You didn't ask about the legal battles we're fighting against industrial fishing companies that are destroying ecosystems. You didn't ask about the educational programs we've set up for kids. You went straight for the personal attack, straight for the gotcha moment, because that's all you know how to do. That's all you care about. His chest was heaving, his face flushed, veins visible in his neck. The raw emotion was undeniable. The studio was in complete chaos now. The audience was buzzing with shocked whispers and gasps, some people standing up to see better. Alyssa Farah Griffin had both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide as saucers. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. The camera operators didn't know where to point their lenses, swinging wildly between Momoa and Joy. The producers were screaming instructions that nobody could hear over the commotion. Joy pointed her finger directly at Momoa's face, her hand shaking with rage. You don't get to come on here and attack me. You don't get to question my integrity. This is my house, and you will show respect, or you will leave. Respect? Momoa's laugh was harsh and bitter, filled with contempt. You want to talk about respect? You? You disrespected every single person I work with. Every community I've tried to help. Every activist busting their ass in the field while you sit here in comfort. Every sacrifice people have made. Every risk they've taken. You disrespected all of that by reducing this entire conversation to whether or not I fly on a goddamn plane. That's what you think matters? That's your contribution to the conversation? That's it, Joy said, her voice ice cold, her whole body rigid. Get off my stage. Right now. We're done here. Gladly. Momoa shot back without hesitation. He reached up and unclipped his microphone with a sharp yank, the sound echoing through the studio like a gunshot. The mic pack hit the floor with a thud. This is exactly what's wrong with this kind of media. With all of you. You don't want real conversations. You don't want real solutions. You don't want to actually help or inform or make a difference. You just want drama and clicks and ratings and manufactured outrage. You want to feel important without actually doing anything important. Then why did you come on? Joy challenged, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Why did you agree to be here if we're so beneath you? If this platform is so worthless? Momoa paused, his hand still on the microphone, and for a moment the anger on his face shifted to something else. Disappointment. Genuine hurt. Because I actually believed you might care, he said, his voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have a real conversation about real issues. I thought maybe you'd actually want to help amplify the message, help bring attention to problems that desperately need attention. I thought you might be different from all the other talking heads who just want their moment. I was wrong. You're not different. You're worse, because you pretend to care. You hide behind this progressive platform while doing exactly what every other corporate media outlet does: tear people down, create division, ignore the actual issues in favor of personal attacks. Joy opened her mouth to respond, her face purple with rage, but Momoa wasn't finished. You know what the saddest part is? He continued, his voice rising again, hands gesturing emphatically. People watch this show. Regular people, working people, people who actually care about making the world better. They trust you. They think you're giving them real information, real perspectives, real journalism. But you're not. You're just feeding them manufactured outrage and shallow takes and surface-level bullshit that makes them feel informed without actually informing them of anything. And that's actually damaging. That's actually harmful. Because while you're playing these stupid games, the real world is burning. Literally burning. You need to leave now, Joy said firmly. But her voice wavered slightly, her confidence shaken for the first time. Security. I'm going, Momoa said, tossing the microphone pack onto the guest chair, where it bounced once before, settling with a thud. But before I do, let me say something to anyone watching at home. He turned directly to the camera, stepping around the desk to get closer, his eyes blazing with passion and conviction. Don't let people like this discourage you from trying to make a difference. Don't let their cynicism and their cheap shots and their gotcha journalism stop you from caring about things that matter. They'll try to tear you down. They'll call you a hypocrite. They'll question your motives. They'll look for any excuse to dismiss you and your work. But if you're doing real work, if you're making real change, if you're actually out there in the field getting your hands dirty and making sacrifices, keep going. Don't stop. Don't let them win. Don't let them make you as cynical and empty as they are. Security! Joy called out again, louder this time, her hand waving frantically, though her voice definitely wavered now. Get him out of here! But Momoa was already moving toward the exit, his jaw set, his stride purposeful and strong. His heavy footsteps echoed through the now silent studio like thunder as he made his way toward the exit, each step deliberate, powerful, final. No one spoke. No one moved. No one even breathed. The cameras stayed locked on him, following his every move as he crossed the floor. The audience was frozen in their seats, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of shock, others nodding in quiet agreement. He reached the door, his large hand wrapping around the handle, and he paused for just a moment. Just one moment where it seemed like maybe he might turn around, might say something else, but he didn't. He pushed through the door without looking back, without hesitation, the door swinging shut behind him with a definitive, resounding thud that seemed to echo forever. The door closed, and with it, any pretense that this had been a normal interview. The studio seemed to breathe again, but it was a shaky, uncertain breath. Joy stood at the desk, her face still flushed bright red, her hands trembling visibly now, though she tried desperately to hide it by smoothing down her jacket repeatedly. Whoopi was shaking her head slowly, her expression unreadable but clearly troubled, her lips pressed into a thin line. The other co-hosts looked absolutely shell-shocked, like they'd just witnessed a car crash and didn't know whether to call for help or run away. Sunny had her hand on her chest. Alyssa was still frozen. Sarah looked like she might cry. The audience sat in stunned, absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive studio. Some were reaching for their phones with shaking hands, already texting, tweeting, recording their reactions, typing frantically about what they'd just witnessed. Others just stared at the door Momoa had exited through, their mouths hanging open, as if he might come back, and this whole thing might be revealed as some kind of elaborate planned bit, some kind of performance art. As if this couldn't possibly have been real. But he didn't come back. The door stayed closed. This was real. Joy finally sat down heavily, smoothing her jacket with hands that wouldn't stop shaking no matter how hard she tried to control them. "Well?" she said, her voice trying desperately for confident, but not quite making it, cracking slightly on the word. That was certainly something. That was unprofessional and uncalled for. But even as she said it, her voice lacked conviction. She knew what this looked like. Everyone knew what this looked like. Whoopi leaned over, speaking to her in low, urgent tones that the microphones barely picked up, but the tension in her body language was clear. Whatever she was saying, it wasn't supportive. The producers were absolutely screaming through their earpieces, their voices so loud that the co-hosts kept wincing and pulling at their ears. The stage manager was making frantic cut gestures with both arms, waving them like he was trying to land a plane in an emergency. But the cameras kept rolling, kept capturing every uncomfortable second, every awkward glance, every nervous shift in seats. Because this wasn't scripted. This wasn't planned. This couldn't be edited out or smoothed over or spun into something else. This was real anger, real frustration, real conflict playing out in real time on live television in front of millions of viewers. And everyone in that studio, from the hosts to the crew to the audience members, knew with absolute certainty that they'd just witnessed something that would be replayed endlessly, analyzed obsessively, and debated furiously for days, maybe weeks to come. This was the kind of moment that defines careers, that becomes part of television history, that people reference years later. Joy tried to transition to the next segment, her voice not quite steady, her usual confidence completely shattered. "We need to go to commercial," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, that looked more like a grimace of pain. "When we come back." But no one was listening to her attempt to regain control. The damage was done, the confrontation was over. And somewhere outside that studio, Jason Momoa was already gone, walking away from what should have been a simple promotional appearance, leaving behind only the echo of his words, the memory of his rage, and the shocked silence of a show that had just imploded spectacularly on live television for all the world to see. The thing about moments like this is they can't be taken back. They can't be edited out or smoothed over or explained away. They can't be spun or managed or controlled. What happened in that studio happened, And it happened in front of millions of viewers who watched in real time as a conversation about environmentalism exploded into a full-scale confrontation between a passionate activist who dedicated his life to a cause and a talk show host who pushed too hard, asked the wrong questions, and struck a nerve that couldn't be unstruck. As the show finally, mercifully cut to commercial, the audience remained in their seats, still processing, still trying to understand what they'd witnessed. The energy in the room was electric and uncomfortable, charged with unresolved tension. Some were already on their phones, tweeting furiously, posting to Instagram and Facebook, sharing on TikTok. The hashtags were already forming, already trending. The clips were already being cut and uploaded, going viral in real time. The internet was about to absolutely explode with reactions, think pieces, hot takes, opinion articles, video essays, memes, and debates about who was right, who was wrong, who went too far. But none of that mattered in the immediate aftermath. In that moment, frozen in time. In that moment, in that studio, there was just the lingering tension of a conversation that went catastrophically wrong. The empty chair where a guest had been sitting just minutes ago, and the unmistakable, undeniable feeling that something truly significant had just happened, something that would be remembered, something that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. Because when respect breaks down completely, when conversation becomes confrontation, when two strong personalities clash head-on without any intention of finding common ground or understanding each other, when pride and anger and frustration all collide at once, there's only one outcome. Someone walks away. Someone refuses to continue playing the game. And last night on The View, that someone was Jason Momoa, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, leaving behind a studio in complete shock, and a host who had pushed one button too many, who had gone one step too far, who had turned what should have been a meaningful conversation into a personal attack that backfired spectacularly. The door he walked through stayed closed, final and absolute. The silence he left behind spoke volumes, said more than any words could say. And the message was crystal clear to everyone watching. Some conversations aren't worth having. Some platforms aren't worth dignifying with your presence. Some battles are won, not by fighting, but by simply refusing to play the game, by walking away with your dignity intact, while everyone else scrambles to pick up the pieces. Jason Momoa had come to The View with the best intentions. He'd come to talk about saving the oceans, about protecting indigenous communities, about making real, tangible change in the world. He'd come with passion and knowledge and genuine concern. He'd come ready to have a meaningful conversation about issues that mattered, issues that affected millions of people, issues that could literally determine the future of our planet. Instead, he found himself ambushed, attacked, dismissed. He found himself in a fight that had nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with optics and hypocrisy and image and ego. And when faced with that choice, when forced to decide between defending himself on someone else's terms or walking away on his own, between staying and continuing a conversation that had become meaningless and toxic, or leaving with his principles intact, he chose the latter without hesitation. The cameras had captured it all. Every word, every gesture, every moment of rising tension until it finally broke and exploded. The audience had witnessed it live, had felt the electricity in the air, had seen the moment things went from uncomfortable to catastrophic. And now, the whole world was watching the clips, forming opinions, taking sides, arguing about who was right and who was wrong and what it all meant. But in the end, when you stripped away all the noise and all the commentary and all the analysis, it was devastatingly simple. A conversation became a confrontation. A guest became frustrated, and then enraged. A host pushed too hard, went too far, crossed a line, and a man who came to talk about something he deeply, passionately cared about chose to walk out rather than continue a conversation that had lost all meaning, all purpose, all value. He chose his integrity over the platform. He chose truth over optics. He chose to walk away rather than compromise what he believed in. The door closed with that final, echoing thud. The show went on, stumbling forward awkwardly. But nothing would be quite the same after this. For Joy Behar, for The View, for Jason Momoa, for everyone who watched, this was one of those moments that changes things, that becomes a reference point, that people talk about for years. The night Jason Momoa erupted on The View and walked off the set, leaving everyone stunned in his wake.